Welcome back to another episode of Tailgate Talk SEC. I am Will Thomas. We've got episode 2 of just transfer portal, trying our best to cover it today. There's a few things I want to hit. It won't be that long of a video, but we'll just cover what's been going on really just this morning on Monday, December 15th. I'm starting off with the University of Florida. Bit of an exodus coming here out of Gainesville. Now, this really isn't that big of a shock. Right, because with Summerall coming in, new coaching staff, you know there is a massive culture shift from sort of the complacent approach that Napier brought to what Summerall is now bringing. So it's not a shock that you're seeing, a bunch of names enter the portal, like Cannon Daniels, guys like Amir Jackson, Jordan Castell. What was a bit of a surprise was DJ Lagway doing it. Because this is a move that is being reported was not necessarily supposed to happen. Like, it was expected that he was going to stay. And Lagway has, reaffirmed his commitment to fans, to the coaches, to his teammates. Like, he loves Florida, and that's where he wanted to be. And then Chris Homer of CBS, he had a really good article this morning saying that that was still true. Lagway didn't want to leave Florida really at all. He wanted to stay there. He loved the school. That's where he wanted to be. But his meeting with John Summerall didn't go very well, reportedly. It was that, Summerall sort of challenged his competitiveness, his work ethic. He didn't just go in there and say, we know you're good, we're going to coach you out of it. It seemed like DJ was used to the Napier philosophy of things, which was, it's okay, don't worry, we're still going to have total faith in you. Right, because it was reported that DJ didn't really care about money. He didn't care if somebody else was brought in, but he kind of just wanted to hear that, that affirmation of, you're really good and we're going to get you to be the best. Instead, Summerall kind of came at him with a competitive mindset, challenging him, as to, his character, all that. And I guess DJ didn't like it. Now, I'm not going to sit here and I'm not going to cast, judgments and aspersions on players that I've never talked to, that I've never met personally. So make of it what you will, but that's what's being reported. So now Lagway is on the move. And my immediate first thought was that he needs to go to LSU and hook up with Lane Kiffin. Because Lane's sort of been, obviously part of it is just Lane being Lane, but he's been pretty on top of DJ Lagway news this whole season. And with Lane's track record of being a great quarterback coach, and with what he's, in theory, bringing to Baton Rouge, I think that could be the spot for DJ. A Lagway and Kiffin marriage, I think, would be incredibly dangerous for opposing defenses. It would bring that new spark, hopefully for Lagway more than LSU, because DJ does need a fresh start. Right, we know the talent is there for Lagway, just the coaching, with Billy Napier, with the play callers, the offensive staff there, it wasn't working. And we know what Lagway can do. We know the talents that he has. So getting into a spot with a guy like Lane Kiffin coaching him, I think would be incredible for his development. But Pete Nagos also reported other schools to watch. One was Baylor, going back home to Texas. Miami, obviously, because Miami is going to be shopping for another transfer portal quarterback. So Lagway's going to have his options. Right, because even though the fan perception of him kind of deteriorated this year because of how bad Florida was and how bad he looked at times, it's still very obvious to those who are in the know and those who scout talent and those who are making the decisions that DJ Lagway is an incredible football player. And if he had stayed at Florida, I think he still would have developed. He would have gotten healthier. He would have had, in theory, a better coaching staff coming in. But I do believe going to a place like LSU is where you can really unlock his full potential. Given that Kiffin's going to be there, given that Charlie Weiss Jr. is going to be there. So if I'm DJ, I'm going to LSU. The money will be there. The coaching is there. So we'll see what he does. But for the rest of Florida, like I was saying, I'd imagine that all these guys left for kind of similar reasons. Because Summerall came in and he challenged them. And if you're not wired that way to where you accept that challenge and you're like, yeah, this is the player that I am. This is how I do my, and if you don't appreciate that sort of intensity, it's probably not going to work out. And that seems like what's happening with Florida. So losing these players is not a shock. Right, in this era of the transfer portal, all this roster turnover, roster attrition, it's not a shock that these guys are leaving. And it's not a bad thing for Summerall as long as he is able to backfill that talent with great players who can fill in those voids. Because you can talk this big competitive game and, you sort of like a weed-out process for players who don't want to be there. But if you can't fill them in with players who do want to be there, who are also great football players, it doesn't matter. It's not going to work. So that really is the biggest test and the biggest definer of Summerall's tenure here. Really not just this year, but for the entire time, is can you backfill that talent when there is roster turnover? Because now, in year one, he has a big test ahead of him because he's got to replace Lagway. And does he go to Darian Mensah who he had at Tulane before he went to Duke this year? Do you maybe find a guy like Brendan Sorsby, who's now in the portal? Do you find a guy like Kenny Minchey, who's leaving Notre Dame? There's a lot of ways that Summerall can go, and he'll have to see. I think the answer has to be Mensa, because that's a guy that he knows. We know how good Darius Mensa is. He just won the ACC, even though he lost 5 games. But there are definitely options out there for Florida. You just have to find the right option for Summerall, for their scheme, and really for Summerall, the rest of this roster retention is so important. Jaden Ball, Dallas Wilson on offense, and defensively, Jaden Woods, Miles Graham. There are so many guys you got to hold on to, and if he's able to hold on to those 4 guys, no one really cares about the rest, because fans were sick of Jordan Castell at safety. Amir Jackson at tight end, I think he's going to be incredibly good, but he didn't really see the field much for Florida, so that's not as big of a loss. But I think Amir Jackson is going to be incredible. Kaden Daniels, same story. I think he's a great player. He wasn't really cracking the rotation. But if Summerall is able to retain that other core of guys like Dallas Wilson, Vernell Brown, Jaden Ball, and then defensively, Miles Graham, Jaden Woods, you still got a really good roster in Gainesville. So we'll see what Summerall is able to do. But really, other big storyline today in the portal, aside from Lagway, are the other quarterbacks who are going in. Aiden Childs from Michigan State. He was at Oregon State, came over with Jonathan Smith. It hasn't really worked out at Michigan State, but he was great at Oregon State as a true freshman. So we know that talent is there. Sort of a similar story to DJ. You know how good this guy can be. He just needs to be in the right situation. So Childs, he's from California. I think you could maybe see him go back out west. Then you have Brendan Sorsby from Cincinnati. He is going into the portal while also exploring draft options. Now, Sorsby is one of the sleepier, best quarterbacks in the country this year. Not a lot of people watched Cincinnati football, which is fair, but Sorsby's a hell of a player. And it seemed like Texas Tech, Indiana were sort of the schools to watch on the surface for Sorsby. I don't think he's really in the running for that Florida opening. But then the last guy, Dylan Raiola. This was sort of speculated for a while after his brother decommitted and his dad was let go of the staff. But Dylan Raiola is leaving Nebraska. He was originally committed to Georgia. He's from Georgia. Ended up at Nebraska. Where will he go? I have no idea. Could he end up back in Athens with Kirby Smart? He obviously is still coming off of that leg injury. So how healthy is he, going through the offseason? That's also a big question. But this was a pretty big day for quarterbacks just so far. It's only 12:30 right now as I'm recording this. And you've got Raiola, Childs, Sorsby, and Lagway all in the portal. 2 5-star guys, Raiola and Lagway. Like, this transfer portal, it's going to be incredibly consequential. You've got these incredibly talented quarterbacks moving schools. So who gets to benefit from adding them, and how does the school who's losing them cope with it? There's so many moving pieces. It's going to be fascinating to watch, and I'll be trying to cover as much of it as I can, ideally all of it, on this channel. So that's all I have today. Just for this little episode 2 of the Transfer Portal series. If you did like it, please subscribe, give me a like, give me a comment on what you think of it, and I'll be back. I will be back very soon with some updates in the portal. But thank you guys so much for watching this episode of Tailgate Talk SEC. I've been Will Thomas, and I will see you next time.